Good morning, everyone. Hope you had a nice weekend. Hopefully you were able to enjoy yourself and perhaps catch up a little bit if you feel like you're a little stressed heading into the last 3 weeks of the course. I did extend the unit exam deadline till Tuesday, I believe. And so let's do it Tuesday at midnight. I've got several exams already. For those of you who feel like you're a little behind, you're maybe not quite at the, where you should be in Python 4.3, 4.4. Again, I recommend you leave anything from scratch and reboard behind, focus hard on 4.1 to 4.4 and do your best to complete that exam because you will not be able to complete it after Tuesday. We've just got to keep moving forward because we've got a second unit exam coming up. So please keep that in mind. And if you find that you're really struggling, make sure you at least complete the first part of the exam. It's all multiple choice, it's all open book. So even if you feel like you're not quite 100% confident in your Python programming abilities, all the answers are up there in the course materials, and you're free to use external sources as well, as long as you're not copying and pasting. And you should be able to make it through at minimum the first part of the exam, the practical portion. So today, a lot of, all of this really has been covered in the other videos that I've put up and the live sessions and whatnot, but I had a couple questions, so I'm just going to go through, a bit more review on it, which might help you a bit maybe with the practical portion of the exam. I'll try to get through it reasonably quickly and answer any questions. As always, if you have questions, if you're struggling with anything, please reach out to me via email. I'm always happy to help. If it's regarding the exam, I won't be able to give you the answer, but I might be able to reframe the question so that you more clearly understand what it is that I'm looking for. So without further ado, these are the things we're going to cover today. I'll just go through them sort of one by one and make sure that you understand how to integrate these into your Python programs. So we're going to start with input. Input is just getting something from the user. And in the case of Python, it's always going to be something that they type in. That's what we're going to be using for our Python studies in this course. And whenever you take input in from a user, you should always save it as a variable, save it into a variable. And you should know that any input by default is going to be set up as a string. So if you're looking for numbers or floats, or if you're looking for, integers or floats or Boolean or something else, you're going to have to convert it by casting that data into a different form. So it always starts out as text, and if you want it to be an integer, you're going to have to cast it as an int, or if you want a float, you're going to have to cast it as a float, and I'll go through that a bit here. So let's just basic input. Let's create a little program here. We're going to use a function, and what we're going to do is we're going to take in a person's name, and then we're going to try and tell them if it's at the beginning of the alphabet, in the middle of the alphabet, or at the end of the alphabet, using what they give us for input as their name, as well as some if statements and elifs and else and things that you're already familiar with from Reborg and from the initial assignments in Python. So the first thing we should do is we should set up a variable, and then let's take some input to make sure that we are getting input from the user. And for this one, we're just going to assume we're not quite at that point in the course yet where we're going to check the data and make sure they actually entered a name or that they used a capital letter or something like that. So we're just going to start by assuming they're going to give us the correct input. And as I wrote on the exam in the practical portion, I don't expect you at this level to be checking the data and making sure that they typed in, in the right format. If I ask for something specific in your program, and I say your program is supposed to take two floats in and then add them together, you can be assured that I'm going to enter in the data that I said I was. I'm not going to try and trick your program or anything like that. That'll come a little later in the course. So let's create a variable. As always, we're going to create a variable that sort of makes sense based on the data we're taking in. So I'm just going to call it username is my variable. And then I'm going to set it equal to whatever they input. So what I'm going to do is type in input. And then the first thing you do in your input statement inside the brackets is you give them the prompt. And the prompt just tells the user what it is you're looking for. So I'm just going to say type in your name. Oops. That's all I really need. Okay, maybe I'll put a space there. So when I run this program, it's going to ask you what your name is, and then it is going to store that as a string in the username variable. And I can test to see if that's working just by printing out username. So whatever they type in should print out when I run the program. Let's run it. Okay, so you see you get the little input box. Sometimes, depending on what program you're using, in PyScripter, it pops up a box. Sometimes other programs, it just comes down here in the output screen, but it's asking me to type in my name. So I'll type in Brennan, my name, hit enter. And now you notice when my program runs, it just says type in your name, Brennan, and then prints Brennan, because that's what I told it to do. I told it to print whatever the user typed in. And it doesn't matter what the user types in. The user can type in, the number 5. It'll say just 5. The user can type in true. It'll say true. Yeah, user can type in a float, 6.5.6, and it'll type the float. But what's happening down here is, even though this looks like a float or a Boolean or an integer, it's actually a string, because anything that comes in with a default input statement is treated as a string, even if it looks like a number. So that's something to keep in mind. If you're trying to get somebody to type in a number and then you want to use the number, you're going to have to cast that data in a specific form. So I'm just going to show you how to do that quickly, even though it's not going to work with our program. Let's just say if I wanted to take in a number, type in an integer. Okay, and I want a specific type of number. I want an integer, right? So when I print it out, right now, it's going to print it out as a string, but I can also print out the type. Okay, you just use type and then in brackets username, because I want to check what the type is of the data they entered. Now watch what happens here. If I ask them to type in an integer and I type in Brennan, okay, it says it's a string. If I run it again and I type in a number, it says it's a string, even though that's clearly an integer. And if I type in 5.6, it still says it's a string, even though I know that that number is a float. So that's me just showing you that no matter what you type in on an input statement, it's going to think it's a string until you tell it to be something else. So you can cast integers or you can cast data in a number of ways. The quickest way is just to cast it right when you're taking it in. So for instance, if I'm looking for an integer, what I would do up here is I would put int and then brackets around the entire input statement. So the entire input statement is inside those brackets for int. So what I'm basically saying here is that no matter, remember, it always works inside out, right? So what I'm asking here is, or what I'm telling it is, whatever the user inputs, I want you to change that to an integer. So that's casting data to a different type. So it started out as a string, and then I'm intentionally casting it to an integer. So now when I print out the type of the username, obviously it's not name anymore, it's a number, but when I print out the type, it should say string now. So if I run my program and it says type in an integer and I type in 5, you'll notice the class is int. Now, it'll also do the same thing if you type in a decimal. So if I type in 5.6, oh, sorry, it's going to break because it can't cast a float to an integer. You'd have to do that a different way. But that's a little later in the course, so we don't have to worry about that right now. The point is, it's going to take in something. It's going to initially treat it as text, but then because you're casting it as an integer, it's going to turn it into an integer right away. And when it turns it into an integer, what you can do is you can do some math with it and things like that. So for instance, if I wanted to print username, so that's whatever number they type in, plus 3, it should give me the answer. If I type in 5, it should print, it's an integer, and it should print I typed in 8. And then it added 3 to get to 11. So I was able to use the data for math because I changed it into an integer. If I don't do that, if I take out this casting process, and then I try to do the same thing, watch what happens. Okay, so input, type in an integer. Okay, 5. And then I get an error because it says I can't concatenate a string. So it doesn't know that the number 5 is an integer unless I tell it to be an integer. Okay, that's why it's important that if you need a certain type of data, that you cast your input as that type of data. In this case, I'll call it an integer. Then if I type in 6, it'll do 6 plus 9 or 6 plus 3 equals 9. Also, I could cast things as a float if I wanted. Let's say I needed a decimal number, and I believe for one of the practical questions, you do need a decimal. That's a float. So if I cast it to a float instead, and it says type in an integer, I'm going to type in a float. I just didn't change the prompt, 5.6. Now you notice the class is a float, and it includes the decimals when it's adding by 3. So casting your data is extremely important if you're taking in data from the user in an input statement. Now, if you're taking in a string, you don't need to cast it as anything because the default is a string. So let's work with that for a bit. All right, so I don't want it to type in an integer. I said our program is going to be type in your name, and then we'll check your name. So I've taken in a name by an input statement, and I've assigned that to the variable username. And now I'm just going to create a little program that is going to send whatever the user types in to a function. And then that function is going to do something with the name. In this case, I said we're going to check a couple things. We're going to check, is it in the, say, the top third of the alphabet? Is it in the middle of the alphabet? Or is it at the end of the alphabet? We know we need a function, so we're going to start it with def and try to name your function something that makes sense. So maybe I'll just call it check alpha or something like that for the name. And then you've got your brackets, and don't forget your colon. Oops, don't forget your colon. Okay. Because I'm actually going to need to send the function some data to check, I need to make sure that I include a variable name inside these brackets so that the function knows it needs to get some data before it does what it needs to do. And in this case, what am I sending it? I'm sending it a name. So I'm going to call it name, and then I'm going to build the rest of my function. So what has happened down here, I haven't built the function yet. I've just kind of set it up. But what I do have down here is a way to get input from the user and assign it to a variable. In order for a function to run, don't forget that you have to actually type in the function. So check alpha, because I want it to run the check alpha function. But in order for the check alpha function to do anything, it's looking for a piece of data. So I'm going to send it a piece of data, and whatever data I send it is going to be renamed. So the variable name essentially in here is going to be name. And this name variable is only going to work inside the function. Name doesn't mean anything outside of the function. It's a local variable, which means it's local only to this function. Everything else out here doesn't know what name is. So for down, if I'm down here, for instance, I can print username because, username is a global variable, meaning your entire program can use it. And you can tell it's a global variable because it's just all the way aligned to the left. So I can print it. But if I try to print name is also a variable, but it only works inside the function. So outside of the function, it doesn't know what name is. So when I run this program, I'm going to type in my name, username. Sorry, I've got a function that has nothing in it. So I'm just going to put in pass. Okay, so type in your name. I'm going to type in Brennan. Okay, I get an error. And the error is not when I tried to print what they typed in. The error is when I tried to print name. And it's basically telling me name is not defined, which is just a way of Python telling you, I don't know what that variable is. I'm not allowed to see it. And the reason the program's not allowed to see it is because it only exists inside of the function. If I try to print name inside the function, that's fine. Inside the function, or anything indented under the function, can access the variable name, but I still need to send it something. So I've got the username, and my function is set up to accept a piece of data. And whenever it gets that piece of data, it's just going to store it in a variable named name. Okay? And then it can use it. It can do whatever it wants with it. And then as soon as you leave this function, it forgets what name is. So if I run that function, and we know just from all our rework stuff, to run a function, you just need to type in the function name, and then in Reborg, we didn't ever send it any arguments, so we never actually sent data to a function in Reborg. We just used stuff. But now we're going to send it something. So what do I want to send it? I want to send it the name that the user typed in, and that is stored in the variable username. So I get a name from the user using an input statement, and then I run the function and I send it whatever you typed in. Whatever you typed in, okay, because I called the function. Remember, think of it like a telephone call. I called the function and I sent it username. So basically, I rang the phone number and I said username. Then on the other end, the function picks up the telephone call and says, okay, you sent me username. I'm going to rename that name for now, and then I'm going to use it and then run my function and do what I need to do. So this is a very simple function. This is a void function. Remember, we have two types of functions. We have void, and then we have fruitful functions. Void functions never return data back to the main program. They just do something and then they're done. So if I run this, and I'm going to step through it just so that we make sure that we are understanding each step, it looks at the function. The very first thing that Python does is it looks at the function, and then it just forgets it instantly. It just kind of makes a note that, hey, there is a function up there. Maybe I'll use it, maybe I won't. The first real line of my program is the input statement getting the username. So when I step into that, it asks for the name. I'm going to type Brennan, and then I'm going to hit F7 OK to say, all right. Now the next line of my program is check alpha. So what it's going to do is it's going to send the username up to the function, and you'll notice it went up to the function. And now it's going to, the only thing in the function right now is print name. And if you notice, if you mouse over name, it says this is a string and its value is currently Brennan. So at this point right now, both username and name are both the same thing. They're both Brennan. But we like to name things differently up in functions just to keep them separate from the data down in your main program. So when I ask it to print name, that's the only line in the function. I'm just stepping through the program. It's going to print the name. There it did. It printed Brennan. And now my program's over because that's all I asked it to do. I asked it to run this function. And then after it's done running that function, it's over. So that's a very, very simple void function. It takes in some data. It prints out the name, but it doesn't do anything else. It doesn't send any data back to my main program. More often than not in this course, you're going to be using fruitful functions. You're going to need to use fruitful functions. You can always tell a fruitful function from a void function because it has the keyword return in it. And return just means I'm sending something back. In this case, I'm not going to do too much to my username. Okay, in my function, maybe I'm just going to add like a Mr. to it. So what I might do is I might just create a temporary variable in here. So maybe I'll call it my new name. And my new name is just going to be Mr. And then I'm going to put plus name. Okay, so my new name is just going to add Mr. to the front of my name. Now, I'm not printing it. I'm making a new variable. That's why I'm using the plus sign. And I know I can only add or can only use the plus sign to concatenate strings. So when concatenate means join, remember? So I'm going to basically join the word Mr. and whatever the name is, and whatever the name is going to be what the user typed in. Then I'm going to return new name because new name is going to have the Mr. attached to it and the username that the person typed out. Okay, now because this is a fruitful function, all it's sending back is the new name. So it's going to send back Mr. Brennan or Mr. Dunbar or whatever I type in. But down here, if I want to print it, I actually have to put in a print statement. Okay, there's no print statement up in check alpha anymore. Originally, it was a void function, and all that void function did was took your name and printed out the name. Now, because I'm returning a string, because we know new name is going to be a string, Mr. and whatever you type in, I need to do something with it. And in this case, I want to print it. So I can't print new name down here because I created new name inside the function. What that means is it's local to the function. It only exists inside this function. So if I try to print new name, it's just going to give me an error. It's going to say, I don't know what new name is. So if I type in Dunbar, it says, I don't know what new name is. And the reason for that is because it is a local variable. It is local to this neighborhood, the check alpha neighborhood. It doesn't mean anything outside of that neighborhood. So I can't just print it. If I want to print it, I have to actually print the entire function. So I need to print check alpha. And then I also have to remember to put in what I'm sending it. So I'm sending it username. Now, in this case, and in all cases, anything that you do, any command that you do inside of Python, it's going to work from the inside out if you've got brackets. So the first thing it's going to do is not the print statement. The first thing it's going to do is the inner part, which is going to say, the inner part of this basically says, run the check alpha function and send it the username. So before it even gets to the print statement, it's going to run this function, which means it's going to send the name up, then it's going to add Mr. to it, and then it's going to return it. When it returns it, all it basically does is replace this highlighted area with whatever you asked it to return. So in this case, it's going to replace this whole check alpha username with Mr. Dunbar. And then it goes to the outside and prints it as the final step. So it's actually printing Mr. Dunbar. So make sure you understand that it always runs from inside out. So let's just check that out using the step through. Okay, so this is step-by-step debugging. Again, first thing it does, checks your functions, doesn't do anything though. First line of my actual program in my main code is asking for a name. So I'm going to type in Dunbar and hit OK. Now it goes to the print line, but it's not going to print yet. It needs to run this function first because it's on the inside. So it's going to send the username up to the function and then just temporarily change it so that the variable name is name. Then I'm going to use it in here. So I'm saying I want a new variable. You can create as many variables as you want inside a function. I created a new variable and I just called it new name, which is going to add Mr. to whatever it is you typed in. So I typed in Dunbar, so new name is basically going to be a single string that has Mr. Dunbar in it. Then I ask it to return Mr. Dunbar to the calling function. So this whole chunk here is going to be replaced by Mr. Dunbar. So I'm just going to step forward again. So you'll notice before it returns, it made the new string, and the new string, you can see the value is Mr. Dunbar. Now it's going to return it, which means it's sending it back to the main program. So it sends it back to the main program, and then it prints whatever it was that it got from the function. And in this case, because I sent Mr. Dunbar, it prints Mr. Dunbar. And it wouldn't matter what I typed in. I could type in the number 5. It's going to return Mr. 5. Okay, remember, everything that comes in an input statement is by default a string. If you want it to be something different, you have to cast it as something different, but you got to be a little careful. Let's just say that I put in integer. So whatever the user inputs, I'm going to try and change it to an integer. Now I'm going to have problems up here because it's not going to know how to concatenate a string, Mr. You can tell it's a string because it's got quotes. And then, but in this case, name is going to be his name is going to be an integer. So it's not going to know what to do. It's basically saying I don't know how to add a word and a number. So when I try to run the program, I say, what's your name? 5. Okay. And then I change it into an integer, and then I send it up. But then when we get to this point, because the name is an integer, it says, I don't know how to add a word and a number, so I break. So just be careful with your data types and what you're casting them to. Otherwise, you're going to get errors. So it doesn't matter what I type in here. As long as it's a string, it's going to say Mr. whatever. Or, you can change it to Ms. or Mrs. or whatever you want. So that's a fruitful function. You can always tell a fruitful function because it's got a return statement. And the return statement has to do something. You can't do, if I ask you to do this program to get a name and then add Mr. to it and then return it with a void function or with a fruitful function, you can't do something like this. You can't print new name up here and then just return nothing, because essentially this is a void function that you're just kind of cheating. Okay? So if you run this, it will print Mr. Dunbar, but the reality is you printed it up in the function, and then you didn't return anything. You had a return statement, but you didn't return anything. So really, you just kind of cheated the system. You put a print statement up here so that it would look the same, but then you didn't return anything. If you don't return anything, you're also going to get this little none down here. And basically, that's saying, hey, there was nothing to return. You just had returned blank. Whereas if I return the new name, now I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm sending the data back to the main program for it to print, which means I'm returning whatever it is they typed in with a Mr. attached to it. And now you see I don't have that none statement. You only get that none statement if you try to return nothing, if you return a blank. It won't break, but it will return none because it's nothing to return. And I'll know instantly that it's not a fruitful function. Well, I'll know it's not a fruitful function just by looking at it. But just be careful if you're using a fruitful function, make sure it's actually returning some data to your main program. Otherwise, it's not really a fruitful function. It's a void function that's kind of dressed up as a fruitful function. So it's really important that you understand the difference between void functions and fruitful functions, because most of the assignments in assignment 12 specifically tell you you need to use a fruitful function for this. All right, now we're going to just do some if. We're going to use an if statement so that our program actually does something other than, say add Mr. to it. And what I said we were going to do is we're going to check if the name that you type in is in the top part of the alphabet, the middle, or the bottom. So I'm going to need an if statement for that. And I want to return either one of three things. I want to return a sentence that says your name is in the top third of the alphabet, or a sentence that says you're in the middle of the alphabet, or a sentence that says you're at the end of the alphabet. Those are going to be my only three options right now. Now that logic, because I need to return just a sentence, that logic needs to be put up in the function. So we need to have an if statement up in the function. We already know we're going to have something that we can use for a comparison because we're sending it whatever the user types in. So for instance, I'm going to send in my first name, Brennan. So when I type in Brennan, it's going to save it as username, and then it's going to send it up to the function, and then I'm going to use it in the function. Because it's something that I need to check, because I need to check if it's at the beginning, at the middle, or at the end of the alphabet, I'm going to need to use an if statement. So I'm going to use an if statement, if name. So I'll just think of name as being Brennan right now, because that's what I intend to type in. If name is less than, because you can use less than, greater than, equals, you can use all of the operators with strings just as easily as you can use them with numbers. It just does it alphabetically instead of comparing the numerical order. So if Brennan is less than A, maybe that should be greater than A. Brennan is greater than A, yeah. If Brennan is greater than A, no, that's not right, less than A. Yes. If Brennan is, I think I got this backwards. Hold on. Well, let's test it. If name is less than A, oh, and this is important too. I want to compare it to a string, so I have to have that in quotes because I'm comparing it to the letter A, not some variable that was named A. So if name is less than A, I'm going to return your name is at the beginning of the alphabet. So I'm returning a string, an entire string. Basically, I'm sending that whole sentence back to my calling function. So that's one option. If you have more than one option, if you have more than two options, you should use an even. So it's just basically like another if statement, but it's all part of the same if structure. So what's another option? If Elif name is, let's say, less than, let's just go M. So if it's less than the letter M, I'm going to return your name is in the middle of the alphabet. And then my else, I don't need to have logic for else because it's going to check if it's less than A, it's going to check if it's less than M second. So it always goes top to bottom, right? So it's going to check this first. If it doesn't apply there, it's going to check the M. If it doesn't apply, if it's not true with the M, then it's going to go to the else. So the else is always going to be the last thing. So I don't actually need to put logic in there. If I wanted to have, if I wanted to separate the alphabet into 4 or 5 or 6 sections, I'd need more elifs. But in this case, I was just going to separate it into 3. Top of the alphabet, middle of the alphabet, or end of the alphabet. So if it doesn't fit the first two, I'm going to return your name is at the end of the alphabet. And I think I might have my logic operators mixed up, my less thans. I think it might be greater than, but it's Monday morning. So I'm just going to test it out. Now, you notice probably that there's 3 return statements inside my function. Is that a problem? And the answer is no, as long as you're only ever going to return 1. So what happens when you run a function is the first time it hits a return statement, then it jumps out of the function. So it's only going to hit one of these 3. It's not going to hit more than one of these. It's either going to do the first one, the second one, or the third one. But it's never going to do the first one and the third one, or the second one and the third one. It's only going to do one of these. So you can have logic in your function, and you can have multiple return statements in your function, but you can only ever use one. So if I built an if statement like this, I know it's going to run one of these 3, but only one of these 3, because that's how if statements work. An if statement with elifs, no matter how many elifs you have, and the else, there could be 15 options here, but it's only ever going to run one of them. And in this case, I wanted to check if it's in the top third, in the middle third, or at the end of the alphabet. So let's just see what happens here. I'm going to print whatever it sends back to me. And it's going to send back one of those three things, this sentence, or this sentence. So let's run it, and let's just check my logic and see if it makes sense. So I'm going to type in my name, Brennan, and I'm hoping that this should be in the top third of the alphabet. And it says my name is in the middle of the alphabet. So my logic isn't working here, and this is the reason why. When you count letters, like basically every character on your keyboard is assigned a number behind the scenes that it uses to check the order of things. And I believe a capital A is 65. So that would be an A, is just assigned the number 65. And then the B, check this again, because I always forget if it's the capital letters are higher or lower. So a B would be a 66, a C would be a 67. So when I'm comparing one letter to another letter, it actually uses these behind the scene numbers to do the comparison. And I'm just going to comment this out just so I can check to see. So I'm just going to source code, toggle it per second. So everything I've typed is a comment right now. So I'm just going to check print A less than B. So all I'm asking it is, oops, sorry, the letter A, not the variable A. There's no variable A. Okay, I'm checking print A less than B, and it prints true. So you see what that means here is that if you look at the numbers going behind the scenes for the A and the B, I basically said print the result of the check is A less than B, and you see it printed true. So that's just Boolean. I'm just asking it, is A actually less than B? If we're comparing the numbers behind the scenes, if I check the other way, if I say, hey, is A greater than B? It's going to say, well, no, 65 is not greater than 66, so it's going to print false instead. Now, what I actually wanted to check was, is a capital letter higher in value than a smaller letter? Okay, false. So what that means is, if you're dealing with alphabetical order, okay, the order goes like this. A is 65, B is 66, C is 67, B is 68. And then, oops. And then if you're doing smaller letters, then after you got to the Z, then you'd have the smaller letters A, B, C. So alphabetical order actually starts with the with capital letters, and then after you get to the end to the Z, then it starts going with the lowercase letters. So A would be 100. What would the A be? It's 26. So A would be, I think A is 95. I'd have to check that for sure, but you can always find that out super easy. That's just a quick Google search, and I always forget it. It's one of those things you don't need to remember. You can always check. You could just say something like number value of letters, something like that. You'll get a. I should probably put a code in there, maybe Python or something like that. There we go. Sure, there's a quick image here. There we go. So that's an Ascii table is what it's called. That's what I'm looking at here. So if you look at the letters here, there's a capital A. It's 101. Oops, I did have it backwards. Capital A is decimal. You're looking at the decimal column. Capital A is 65. Capital B is 66, like I thought. And then if you go down past all the capital Z, and then there's some special characters. And then you'll notice the lowercase a is 97, lowercase b is 98. So when I asked it, is a capital A less than a lowercase a, it said, yes, it is. And that's because the number 65, which is running behind the scenes, is less than the number 97. So a capital A, if you're trying to put things in alphabetical order, a capital A would go before a lowercase a. And that can be a bit confusing if you're, say, doing is capital D and a lowercase a. Which of those would come first in alphabetical order? If you're doing that not inside a computer program, your instinct is probably to say, well, no, because D comes later in the alphabet than A. But just remember that it does all the capitals first, then it does the lowercase. So how would that play out in Python? Just for a quick example, something like this. So if I had these words, if I had alpha, if I had lowercase alpha, or maybe I'll just say alphabet, and then I had the word beta, with a capital B, the way this would work if I put it in alphabetical order is like this. It would alpha first, then it would do beta, and then it would do alpha bet. Maybe if I put another word in there, maybe I'll put a lowercase x-ray or something like that. So in this case, it always checks the capital letters first. So the first in alphabetical order would be alpha, then checks for the start of capital letters, K, then beta. Now it's done all the capital letters. Now it'll go to the lowercase. So alphabet would be next, and then x-ray, because X lowercase is going to be later in the alphabet than A lowercase. So just be aware if you're putting things in alphabetical order, that's the way it operates. It'll check all the capitals first, and then it'll do everything else. All right, well, the whole point of that thing that I was just talking about, I'm just going to uncomment my code, and toggle comments, and now it's on. The whole point of that is I'm checking for capital letters. So if you put a lowercase letter in it, it might confuse things. I typed in Brennan. So when it typed in Brennan, it was basically asking, is the letter B less than the letter A? And in this case, it is not. Okay, it's greater than, because if I put in, if I check Brennan, capital B is 66. Is that less than 65? No, it is not. So instead of checking if it's an A, I'm probably going to want to maybe check two things. Let's check to see, is it greater than, or sorry, is it less than, let's just pick a letter that's kind of in the top third. Let's just say F. If my name, okay, is less than F, which means it'll be alphabetically higher, okay, A, B, C, D, E, F, so it's higher in the list than F, not a greater number, but it's higher in the list. And then I can put an AND statement. And name is greater than or equal to A. And the reason I did that is because it could be, my name could start with an A. So what it's checking here is my name between F and A in the top of the alphabet? Because if it's less than F, okay, if B is less than F, that means it's before F in the alphabet. So that's one check, but also it's checking, is it greater than or equal to A? So that means that what this is checking is your name, does your name start with A, B, C, or D or E? Okay. If it starts with F, this is going to be false. And then it's going to go down to the Elif to check the next thing. The reason I put the and name greater than equal to A is because I also want to make sure that it's a letter. Okay, because it could be less than F, but it could be some weird character that's not even in the alphabet. So I'm just checking, is it between a capital A and an F in the alphabet? So if I just go back to that quick ASCII code thing here, what I'm checking is it anywhere in this range of characters? Is the value behind the scenes 65, 66, 67, 68, or 69? If so, then that is going to be true. If it is a capital F or number 70 or later, then it's not going to be in the top third. So these are the numbers that it's comparing. So let's just say I type in Brennan. Well, that starts with a capital B. So it's going to check, is 66 less than whatever F was, 70? Is 66 less than 70? Yes, it is. So that's true. And, not or, but and, is the name greater than or equal to A? So is 66 greater than or equal to 65? That is also true, which means it's going to run this statement, return your name is at the beginning of the alphabet. So if I've checked this and this is not true, let's just assume that I am actually typing in letters and I'm not worrying about strange characters or anything like that. My next check is going to be, is it greater than M? Okay. Because if it's less than M, because if it's less than M, then it has to be somewhere between F and M. And if it's greater than M, then we know it's toward the end of the alphabet. So if it's between F and A, it's going to return the first line. If that's not true, it's going to check the next thing. Okay, now, is it less than M? If it is, it's going to run the return, your name is in the middle. And then if it's not either of those two things, it'll run the else, which says it's at the end. So let's just test it out and make sure it's working. So I'm going to type in my name, Brennan, and because of a capital B, I'm hoping that it says you're in the top part of the alphabet. And it does say that. Your name is at the beginning of the alphabet. Okay, well, let's check something that's after M. Okay, so, or sorry, let's check something that's after F, but before M. So let's EFG, so let's type Garrett. Okay, so it says your name is in the middle of the alphabet because the G did not fulfill that condition. So it goes to the next one and it checks, is G before M? Yes, it is. So now it ran the middle one and then it stops. Remember, as soon as it does one of these three things, it's done. It will never do more than one of these. So if we check a name at the end of the alphabet, so let's just try Z, okay, it's not between F and A, so it checks the next one. It is not between, basically it's not between F and M, so it checks that. It doesn't even check the next one. It just says, well, if it's not between F and A, and it's not between M and F, then it has to be at the end of the alphabet. It says your name is at the end of the alphabet. So that's how it treats letters when you're doing comparisons. Remember, all it returned is a sentence. All it returned is a string saying your name is at the end of the alphabet. So it replaced this with that sentence, and then I told it to print that sentence. So that's why it printed this at the end. It might make a bit more sense if you're checking numbers. So let's just, instead of checking alpha, let's just check num. This might be a little easier to understand. And I'll just call this user num. And then, well, actually, I'll just call this num. Let me use user num down here. Got to change all my names now. Let's set this up here. I'll just go from scratch because it's easier. So this time I'm going to check a number. So instead of username, I'm going to rename my variable user num. And I'm going to say type in a number. Now, because I'm asking for a number, I need to make sure that I cast this input statement as either an integer or a float, because otherwise it's going to treat it as a string. So I'm going to use a float on this one so that they can type in whatever number they want. Make sure I've got enough brackets. And then I'm going to run a function called check num. And I'm going to send it the user num that they typed in. So whatever number they typed in, I'm going to send this to the function. How's the function going to work? Let's just check to see if it is less than, equal to, or greater than 5.0. Okay, so if num is less than 5, okay, print, or return, sorry, because this is going to be a fruitful function, return, and then we'll just return the sentence, the number is less than 5. So we checked that. Now let's check something else. So let's do elif num is, if it's not less than 5, let's check if it's less than 10. So if elif number is less than 10, let's return the number is between 6 and 9. Because I didn't use less than or equal to, I used just less than. So I know if the number is not less than 5, it has to be greater than 5. So that starts at 6, 7, 8, 9, right? Then I'm checking, is it less than 10? So I'm only checking up to 9 there, because 9 is less than 10, but 10 is not less than 10. So what I'm really checking here is the number between 6 and 9. And if that's false, I can do another check. Maybe I'll just do another elif just to show you can do as many as you want. If num is less than 15, okay, let's return the sentence. The number is between, has to be between 10 and 14. And then for our else, we could say something like return the number is greater than 14. And now let's check and see if it works. Okay, so let's just step through it step by step. It checks to see there's a function, then it doesn't do anything else with it. It goes down to your main code, says, hey, type in a number, and I'm going to turn whatever you type in into a float. So I'm going to type in the number 7. Okay, and enter. Okay, so it says, okay, great. I took your number, and then I changed it into a float. So I'm gonna treat it as a float moving forward. You see my PyScript is crashing right now for some reason. Just give it a second. Hopefully it comes back. Oh dear. Come on, Python, come back. There we go. Okay, excellent. Got lucky there. So I'm just gonna save it and make sure. Oh no, it's crashing again, isn't it? No. Silly random PyScripter crashes. Actually, it's pretty stable. It doesn't crash very often, but I think it might have crashed here. Let's jump away for a second. Okay, there we go. I'm just going to save it quickly in case. Oh, it's not letting me save it. That's super weird. Okay, I suspect this is just going to keep crashing, but we'll see. Okay, so I'll hit F7 again. Hard. All right, I'm going to have to get rid of that, unfortunately. And basically do all that again. Because I didn't save my program, which is a good lesson for everybody. Make sure you save your program. Okay, so I have to rebuild this stupid thing. What did I call it? Check num. And then it accepts a number, which I call num. Then I was checking if num is less than 5. Return. Go shorter here. Return num less than 5. And Elif num was less than 10. Return num and I had one more Elif, I believe, if num was less than 15. I was going to return. What did I say? 6, 9, 10, and 14. And then the last option, the else, the kind of catch-all was return is greater than 14. And then I had to, down here, get my input statement. So user num, I called it, equals, I need it to be a float. So float of whatever the input is, and the prompt that I'm going to give them is type in a number. And then I need to run my function. I need to print whatever the result of check num is, sending it the user number. All right, I think that's pretty much what I had. Let's see if it works. Hey, how about you be smart this time and save it? Sure. Okay, so let's step through it. Let's run it. Goes down to our main code, says, hey, type in a number. I'll say, okay, I'm going to type in the number 7. Now I'm going to step to the next line, which is it's going to print whatever the result is of checking check num, and I'm setting it user num. So if you look at the variable user num, currently it says it's a float. It's 7.0, which is good because I typed in 7. And now it's going to send it to check num. So we go up to the check num function. You'll notice that num is a float equal to 7. So it's always the same thing as what you send it. You're just using a different variable name to indicate that num is only available inside this function. So it's going to check, is 7 less than 5? That should be false. So it should skip to the elif. It does. Now it's checking, is my number less than 10? It is less than 10, which means it's going to return num between 6 and 9, which it is. So it returns that to the main program, and I told it to print whatever it returns. So it prints 7 here. Yoink. Down here. Turn. I'm having a weird error here. Oh, there it is. Num between 6 and 9. I have no idea why that was happening. But that did what it was supposed to do. I typed in a number, it went up, it checked, it said, no, it's not less than 5, so I'll check the next thing down. Yes, it is less than 10, so I'm going to return and print num between 6 and 9. I should be able to test this with any number. Let's test it with a 4. Hopefully it prints number is less than 5. Okay, num less than 5. Let's test with something between 10 and 14. Let's try 12. Okay, num between 10 and 14, and let's test with a larger number, 55, and it should say number is greater than 14. So basically, you took in some data from the user, you turned it into a float, you sent that float up to the function checked where the number fit in within this logic, and then it returned one of these 4 statements. And you can use multiple sets of logic if you want to do certain specific checks. You just have to remember, if you're using or, and, or not, any of those keywords, you can't just put if num less than 5 and greater than 10. You can't do that. Okay? Now, which you're kind of used to doing in say math class. The reason this doesn't work is you always have to type the variable name in again. So if you're going to check more than one thing, let's just check to see if the number is 5 or 8. Okay, so let's check num. Type in a number between, that is either 5 or 8. Okay, so when I send that up there, if I want to check kind of 2 things at once, I want to check to see if it's a 5 or an 8. Then what I would be checking is if num is equal to 5 or num is equal to 8. And I should probably put the 0.0 in because I'm actually checking a float. Okay. So if the number is equal to 5.0, forgot the colon, it's going to return number is either 5 or 8. Okay, and then I'll maybe just put an else. I won't have all these elifs. I'll just say else return number is not 5 or 8. So I used a compound logic up here. I checked kind of 2 things. I checked, is it 5 or is it 8? Because if it's either of those 2 numbers, it's going to return your number is either 5 or 8. If it's neither of those numbers, it's going to run the else. And remember, I had to include the variable name with each check that I did. And you can do as many as you want. Maybe I want to check if it's 10. So or num equals 10. Remember, you always have to use 2 equal signs if you're comparing. Otherwise, it thinks you're trying to do a variable for 10. It's not 5 or 8 or 10. So now when I check this out and run it, it asks me, hey, type in a number that is either 5 or 8 or 10. So I'll type in 8. And it says num is either 5 or 8 or 10. That is true. Now I'll type in a 10, see if it works. Num is either 5 or 8 or 10. That's great. Now I'll check something that's not that. I'll check a 6. And it says num is not 5 or 8 or 6. So just keep that in mind if you're kind of chaining together ors and ands. You always have to include the variable name again so it knows exactly what to compare. All right, I think the last thing I had on there is I just wanted to review the way that computers count. Let's just say I've got a string that is the word Python. This is covered in a bunch of other videos as well, but I just wanted to remind you, if we're dealing with a word, and let's just say the word is Python, it's a string, you can print certain characters by referring to what's known as the index number. And it starts at 0 is the important thing to remember there. It always starts at 0. You can count from the front or back. If you count from the back, what you have to do is you have to use negative numbers. So you can either count this forward or backward, depending on what you want to print. So for instance, if I want to print, okay, I'm just going to say word equals Python, just to mirror what I have up there. If I want to print just the key, I can go print, okay, word, and then use square brackets to tell it which of these letters you want to print. If I print word 0, it's basically I'm saying go to the 0 index of the word, which is Python, and the 0 is always going to represent the thing at the far left. So that's going to print P. Okay, so you see how it printed P down here. If I want to print the T, well, if I look up here, the T is represented by the second index. So if I want to print T, I would print word 2. Now, this is the only reason students get confused about this is because you're probably used to thinking of the T as being the third letter of this word, right? First, second, third. Just remember the computers always start counting at 0. So instead of it being the third letter, it's going to be the index 2 letter. And then if you want to print the N at the end, that would be a 5. So that'll print the N. If you try to print anything other than that, it'll give you an error. So if I try to print the 6th, there's nothing there. So it says index out of range. Basically, it's just saying, hey, there is no 6th character. So that's what's happening there. Now, you could do it in reverse as well. If I type -1, it just starts at the other end of whatever string it is. And it says, well, at the -1 position, I've got an N. At the -4 position, I've got a T. I just used the word Python for an example, but it would work with any word. You know, if I typed in Graham and I asked for -4, it's going to go, the M is -1, the A is -2, the H is -3, and the A here is -4, so it should print A. And if I print, let's say I print 3, okay, well, I'll print 4, actually. So if I don't have a negative, it starts at the left side. So G would be 0, R would be 1, A would be 2, H would be 3, and the second A would be 4. So maybe I'll make it print 5 instead, so we can tell which letter it is because there's 2 A's. So the 5th, the letter at position 5 is the M, so that should print M. There you go. And then you can use what's known as string slicing if you want to have more than one character. So for instance, if our word is, we'll just go back to Python just so it matches what's above it. If I wanted to print, say, THO, I just have to separate it in here with colons. So identify where the T is. So it's 0, 1, 2, so the T. And then you need to go all the way to the O. So you're going to go, that's 2, 3, 4, and then one more. So I'm going to go 5. It actually stops 1 after. So if I go 2 to 5, basically it says I'm going to print 2, I'm going to print 3, I'm going to print 4, and then it told me to stop at 5. So I stop at 5 before I print it. If you just want to print TH, then you would say print from 2 to 4 instead. So now it goes, I start at 2, 0, 1, 2 is the T, I print the 3, and then it tells me to stop at 4, so I stop at 4. So that's how you can take little slices. If you don't include anything before the colon, it assumes you want to start at the beginning. So this will print from 0, 1, 2, 3, it'll print Pyth. Okay. So if you don't have anything before the colon, that's what it does, it just starts at the beginning. If you don't have anything after the colon, it assumes you want to go to the very end. So if I start at index 1, so 0 is P, 1 is Y, so it's going to start with 1. And because I've got nothing after the colon, it's going to print all the way to the end of the string. So it'll say Python. Okay, and if you added more letters in here, it would go, oops, it would go to the very end of that as well. See? You can step, which means you can skip letters too if you include one more. Okay, if you include one more colon, the number after the second colon is what are you skipping by. So if we think about what this is going to print, it's going to start at 1, which is Y. It's going to consider 1, 2, 3, and 4, but it's going to skip by 2. So it's going to print the first one, which is the Y. Then it's going to skip over the T and print the H. Okay? So it started at the Y, that's 1. And I told it to stop before the N, but I also told it to skip 2. So putting in 2 just means it skips 1, really. So it skips over the T, prints the H. Then it skips over the O, but then it's already past where I told it to stop. If I printed it with a 3, it's going to skip twice. So it'll start at 1 still, and then it'll skip the T, skip the H, and then print the O. Okay. If I try to skip more than that, it's not going to print anything after the Y because I told it to stop at 5. I told it to stop before the N. So if I try to print skipping by 4 or 5 or 6, it's just not going to work. It's going to print Y, and then it's, well, it is working, but it's not going to print anything after that. So that second or that third number, if you've got 2 colons, is what does it skip by? All right. So hopefully that, I mean, that takes you through the entire exam. There is more than that inside those other review videos that I put up. You should have access to everything that you need. If you've got any questions, please reach out to me. Have a wonderful week. Work hard and do what you need to do, and let me know how I can help you. So thanks again, and have a great day.